What's up, world? It's Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. I want to welcome you back to another edition of Family Talk with my pops, Wayne Carter. Pops, I just really appreciate you doing this. Like I said last time, kind of belaboring this exercise for me, so I'm just very grateful for your time.
Time we get through with this, you all be an expert.
Expert in what we'll have to figure out. Um, But it's kind of interesting that you said that because, as far as being an expert, you're certainly an expert. I don't, some folks depend on me to be an expert, whether I am or not. I do my best for them. But in something that I've noticed in our conversation, as well as some of my other conversations with folks, and is this natural kind of well, not natural, but this basic organizational structure, right? You talked about this kind of two pathway structure of the military and of what you saw in the construction field. And then I have had a conversation with a friend of mine who is an electrician, and he was with the electrical union, and he kind of spoke also of kind of that dual pathway, and it's something that you see across industries. So that that's just an observation to be made from some of our talks, and also this conversation on leadership that's kind of emerging. And we'll get to kind of develop more as we go through your life and your career. And so it's a lot of fun stuff. Um, to me, it's fun that we get to talk about and kind of explore in all this. So, um, joke around about what we might be an expert at, but I think there's some serious value in there. So, just really appreciate you once again. Last time we were getting you into law school and actually kind of getting you to where you're about to have your first child, my older sister. And, I was thinking about some things and really wanted to kind of, once again, kind of slow down and go back a little bit and kind of clarify some stuff for me. We were talking about law school and kind of the demands of that and the reading you had to go through, right? How you said you spent for every hour in the classroom, you spent 2 hours or more in the library, right?
Yeah,
You,
more. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I asked you, about you enjoying reading, and you made the statement that you enjoyed reading when it was something that you were interested in, right? And so it's like we've covered a lot of your life, and you didn't just all of a sudden develop this love of reading and this ability to read and absorb and critique. And so I wanted to go back and explore that, what you enjoy to kind of read a little bit more. And so thinking back on that, maybe through your undergrad career and maybe even before, do you think of anything that you enjoyed to read or anything that maybe influenced you? I mean, know that you grew up in the church. I mean, what about your study in the Bible? Is that when did you start taking that maybe a little more serious and things like that? So there's a couple of questions in there. What did you enjoy to read, right? And kind of piqued your interest at an early age.
Well, I kind of enjoyed parts of history, reading history stuff. I probably my the first thing I can think in my memory of really just getting into was a class we had to have, and I guess it was elementary or what was middle school. It was one of those middle ages of Tennessee history. We had a class in Tennessee history, and uh, and that was kind of neat. I enjoyed that. Um, I really never thought about how enjoying reading the Bible so much until probably. in the latter part of the last century, in the
Yeah.
1990s,
Yeah.
because I read it, but I don't remember really tweaking with me. But looking back in high school, I had my first class in ancient history, which the teacher used primarily the Old Testament as the text. And I enjoyed that. So yeah, that was probably some of the stuff. I enjoyed literature. Uh,
What did y'all read? I don't know if we talked about this, and I feel like we didn't. But what is there anything that stood out to you in maybe middle school, high school, and even those first couple of years in undergrad in the literature section that stood out to you or that you appreciated?
uh, not a particular work off the top of my head. I know, like an undergraduate, we sort of hit on a little bit of that. I really started to enjoy and do okay in some of the political science classes and some of the books and maybe not even books but works we had to read. Uh,
Like
I don't,
essays and
I
stuff
don't
like
think about
that?
it. I didn't think about it as enjoying it as much as it was part of the curriculum. I mean, you had to do it, but looking back on it, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Okay, and so I just think about my own life, I guess, and everything that we know or we think we know is a reference to a memory, right? And so you obviously had a very big impact on my life, and you kind of steeped me in some of this, early American philosophy as far as Enlightenment philosophy, and then in the Transcendentalist with Emerson and Thoreau and Whitman, and really, you really kind of steeped me in that area with kind of that individual thought and a love of nature. So I'm really curious to when you maybe discovered that or how that became important enough to you to kind of impress on me. Did that? I wonder if that happened during that undergraduate time or during law school. Talk to me about that.
Well, I was sitting there just thinking about what we just said, and I think the books like Huck Finn
Yeah,
when I was a kid, and I think I saw myself in those because of the way we live. Sort of woodsy kind of person, but also near enough railroad tracks and being amazed at how other people did things, and when you see something new. Uh, and I look back at Huck Finn as being that kind of character when he would go into to this town or city and just observing what was new and trying to figure out, okay, I need to fit in, I need to those kind of things. So I hadn't really had thought about it till you just mentioned it. But that. Um,
another one that I think about that impressed or influenced a lot of young Southern lawyers that I kind of know, I guess, is Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. Did you read that in high school? Do you remember that at
uh,
all?
did I don't think I read it till I got in college.
Okay.
Yeah, there was another play that we had to read. I think it was in college. I think it was when I was at middle the first year. Um, Inherit the Wind, which was a play about the Scopes monkey trial in Dayton, and that just fascinated me to read the play about, particularly the courtroom scene. Uh,
Yeah. And knowing that it was based on something, not only something real, but something kind of close to
yeah,
home.
yeah. Well, Tennessee history. There you go. Go
Yeah.
back to that
Yeah.
Tennessee history idea.
Sure. Sure. That's interesting. That's interesting. And that makes me ask. We need to ask another question. That's kind of well, not kind of, but it's in the Tennessee history, but it's outside of your life. Have you ever heard of the book "Farewell to the Hills"?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I have not read it.
So written by James Corn. I didn't know if James Corn was a local of the area in East Tennessee. I didn't know if he was any relation to Charlie Corn. Was Charlie Corn grew up? Was he kind of a local to where is he actually from?
Charlie's from here.
Yeah,
Yeah, that it seemed like I've even heard that name, Charles Corn, before, but
James F. Corn is the author of Farewell the Hills, and it's a novel of the Eastern Cherokees, and it's all about the area down there around Cleveland, and it, you know, all the things, the Walker family of the Walker Valley, and all the big names around there are in the book, as well as the John Ross and the history of the Cherokee removal and a little bit before. So that's a side thing. I've got it on. I've got it requested on an interlibrary loan from the Cleveland Public Library down there. So I'm trying to get that up here so I can check it out.
Was he a Colonel James Corn?
I don't know that. I'd have to look into it further than I really got handy right now. I don't know that. I don't know that. Actually, my buddy Tommy that I do my book club with found that over at the Cleveland Public Library, which I always say is one of my favorite libraries. And I'm kind of a nerd. If I spend any time somewhere, I'm going to check out their public library, see what they got going on. And I've got some that I really like kind of across the country. But I love the Cleveland Public Library ranks right up there with any public library. I think it's just a great resource and historical location. Y'all really have a treasure there in that. So, anyways, I just kind of nerded out on you a little bit on there, but that is true. And so, getting really back to your interest in kind of history, and even you talked about Mark Twain, that is kind of an early of what we call American realism, right? And developing this genre of American literature. He was kind of a pioneer in that. And so that kind of stuff interests me as well. And so I was just interested in maybe what you were picking up on in the realm of literature and other media. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so with that same idea, we talked about some of your early interests as far as music and how you were really into like kind of early rock and roll. And even, you talked about Ike and Tina Turner, and you also talked about kind of the early jazz fusion bands that you enjoyed, like, Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Chicago and stuff like that. And that's kind of the 60s, I guess. Do you remember anything of what you were consuming in your kind of your college years and through the 70s?
Well, the music in the college years was the things you just described.
Okay.
But I kind of actually grew up in the late 50s or the 60s because I graduated high school in 72. And looking back on it, I was exposed to the 50s and 60s stuff because of my brother. Donnie was 8 years older than me. And so I'm sure he, would have had that music around and I would have heard it because, I listened to, the classic rock and roll station a lot. And a lot of the 50s and 60s stuff I just know. And so it had been his exposure because mom and dad were probably more into the country music thing.
Yeah, well, tell me what that even, as far you say you listen to the classic rock station, and now I know what you mean by that. I think, and we all know those stations. Those stations play things that are even as recent as the '90s.
Right.
So when you think of classic rock, what maybe some bands or songs kind of come to your mind?
Well, Rick Nelson would have been one. And he was also on a TV show, and I was just reading something about him yesterday. And the TV show, they would always end him singing. It was a the Nelson family. He was one of the kids in the family, but he became a pretty big rock and roll star. Um, Probably around the time the Beatles hit the nation. Um, the Beach Boys, they were big back in those days. There was a lot of the girl groups around the Shirelles and
Yeah.
some of those. Um,
Huh. I didn't know who Rick Nelson was. Googled him real quick. That's interesting. The Beach Boys. Yeah, I know you always you kind of pass that on to me, a love of the Beach Boys, and there's a lot of those kind of fun, kind of poppy songs that they made, or even maybe even gimmicky songs, you know. But then some of those other things that they did. That Brian Wilson did later on and composed was pretty experimental and really pretty progressive forward with the exploration of pop music and pop sounds.
well,
Um,
there were some other singers around. I don't know if I'd consider them rock and roll. They certainly weren't necessarily country. They were, like the Sinatras, Dean Martin, Jim Reeves, Eddie Arnold. Those kind of
yeah,
guys. The 50s, early 60s, before the Beatles and rock and roll really hit.
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. All right. So and
That's
right
big band.
within.
Some of that
Say
would
that
be
again.
considered big band music.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of the I mean, you really kind of. I guess I have a problem of wanting to categorize and kind of even compartmentalize things. And you just listen off the what you said, and there was a lot of different genres that kind of ring out from kind of maybe what they called Nashville swing country music, kind of with that Nashville swing style and
Well,
like that.
I was listening to an interview with Willie Nelson last night, and some of the stuff he wrote, "Crazy." Patsy Cline made that
Yeah,
such a big song, and I guess that was country, but it wasn't really Grand Ole Opry country.
right, right. It was that kind of a more polished,
Yeah,
even business class country, maybe, right? Hmm,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
interesting. And so, what about this other stuff you mentioned before? I know that in kind of your journey, we haven't gotten to you going over to Germany, but you have mentioned in our past conversations how important your liberal arts education was because you were exposed to some different coursework that allowed to appreciate some of this classical art that you experienced in Europe. Um, did you become what's the word? Did you consume the arts while you were kind of going through college? You talked about the play that you read. Did you go to any plays? Did you go to the symphony? That's another thing that you and my mother kind of did with me as a child, and it's very kind of important to me and the arts and being to really expose all demographics to the arts. When did your appreciation for those things really kind of take off, and did you consume anything like that through
Well,
those years, or did you have time? Because I know, like when you're in the doing all that work, it's hard to have time to go to a play or to a concert or anything like that.
the first time I was really ever exposed to anything like a symphony would have been at Methodist College,
Okay.
and one of the requirements for a Bachelor of Arts degree back in those days was to take a music appreciation class and an art appreciation class. And so that would have been the first time I'd ever really and it went to a symphony. Um, Probably it was at Methodist University. They had it at the art, the college uh, symphony, and
Yeah.
I remember just you read about it, and part of the music appreciation class, you listen to things, and they talked about those things. But when you actually went to the symphony and experienced, it's not just listening; it's the experience of being there. It was, yeah, I was pretty impressed, and so that's when I first really got to enjoy the symphony. And I mean, obviously, I'm no expert. I know what I like, but that was fascinating. And the same way with the art appreciation. Uh, going to some of the art museums and the stuff they would have there at the college, and then having the art teacher to go with us and explain the types of things to look at pieces of art in those
Yeah,
museums. It was the Bachelor of Arts degrees that exposed me to that.
yeah. Did you take any of that with you immediately after, or and kind of getting more to catching us up contemporarily, I guess, in your story? Um, did you bring any of that home, so to speak, when you finally got home to Smyrna and settling in?
Well, yeah, in a way, because and you alluded to in the late '70s, early '80s, I was deployed to Germany a number of times, and then as we talked about, had some time off during those deployments to go into some of the various towns and cities, and to actually go into what I thought was this most exciting thing, the Roman Catholic cathedrals, and to be exposed and see the artwork and just the sculptures, the paintings, the stained glass windows. Just yeah, I was overwhelmed a couple of times, and we may get to that, but I had one of my more major religious experiences was sitting in the Roman Catholic Cathedral. I had a few hours off in it one afternoon, and just being a tourist in whatever I don't even remember which town it was, Stuttgart or Mannheim or Karlsruhe, one of those pretty major towns, and wandered into this Roman Catholic cathedral and sit there and just looking at the artwork around me and seeing the stories that I had learned as a child from the Bible,
Yeah,
Moses and the Ten Commandments and David, and those kind of things. And it's really the story of the Bible and art. And in the center of that was a probably a piece of sculpture of Christ on the cross. And I was come over. I became teary eyed and cried that not a word is spoken. But
yeah.
I experienced this whole overwhelming art class in that cathedral and the love of Christ for that. Yeah, that was pretty fantastic.
Yeah. And it's amazing how the arts can affect the individual and kind of humanity as a whole. We see
Well, yeah,
different pieces.
particularly country boy from Nowhereville, Tennessee,
Yeah, yeah,
there.
yeah. And so I wanted to explore that stuff a little bit as far as your media consumption, and then I also am interested in, you know, my whole life we have kind of been outdoor sportsmen in the sense of hiking and fishing and paddling and really hiking a lot. Um, and there's some kind of lineage of philosophers that coexist with the recreation activity of hiking. And I don't know that we either there's no conscious effort in that, I don't think, but there's something interesting there as well. When did the concept of kind of recreationally hiking develop in you? When were you kind of exposed to that, and when did that kind of take off in your life? Were you doing that in college? Because I know for like a lot of people, that is when they're exposed to that, right? Either through a college class or through some friends that are kind of into that stuff. Or, was it Like, how were you exposed to that as a recreational activity, I guess?
Yeah, well, the woodsy thing would have, would have gone back to when I was a child. I spent a lot of time in the woods, but part of
And the interest in your literature, right? There's something thematic there. Your interest in the literature is in the natural area, and we even talked a little bit more about that transcendental philosophy, which I'd like us to get into at some point. So there's the thematic of the natural world there. So tell me how that continues on.
well, and as I remember, uh, in the Baptist church that we grew up in Laverne, they had a boys group called the RAs, which stood for Royal Ambassadors, and the girls had a GA, and I don't know what GA stood for, but there was always a group of men that would lead these RAs, and they were just they were just civilian men. They were just people that went to church there. They had career. They weren't educated as far as teaching
And you're
or
talking about Laverne Baptist at a
yeah
younger age,
at a
right?
young age.
Yeah.
They
Okay.
would part of the RAs group that they would do. That thing that they did was from time to time take us camping, take us fishing. So that was just a thing that we did as part of life in Laverne First Baptist Church and being a part of that boys group.
And so you really, your first influence from that, or your first introduction to that, was really from church, right? And
Well, as
that
far as
community.
camping, well, it probably yeah that and this, and then we would some of us boys would get together in the summertime and camp out.
Yeah,
Uh, but it was probably around the same time.
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. Well, I think we missed that a little bit in our talk, so that's interesting. And getting it, why do you think was obviously where we are from, and we have a lot of natural area around us, and a lot of natural resources to experience and to attract those types of people. So, in a community type setting, is going to reflect that, right? And the church is a kind of a micro analysis of a community at whole sometimes, right? So that's pretty understandable. And then also, I think about the value of mentorship in that through the church, creating that mentorship with young men. Do you think that how important was that aspect of it?
Well, you don't. I did not think about it at the time. Looking back at it, I still am appreciative of those men and women, but in that particular group, men that would take their time to do that. Because as I recall, one or two of those guys didn't necessarily have children our age. They were just was part of the church, and they liked to fish and hunt and camp and did that as a thing with the guys. And so it was a pretty big deal. Um, and I think as far as the camping, and I look back at the times when some of us boys would go camping on our own. Well, the farmer people knew where we were out on in the farm, but there's not adult supervision directly with us, and that looked like to me that represented a certain amount of freedom.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
got yeah I could just take off and go nobody know
Yeah.
it's me sooner or later, but I could no one's making me be there, and so that was the idea of being free was pretty
Yeah.
big.
And the idea, so that lot we talked about that before when in your younger life, and I'm glad you bring that up. And kind of the woods for us. I mean, when we talk about camping as young kids, kind of going back, we are talking about the woods outside of town very much, or outside of the farm. That's not developed for agriculture, right? And the woods representing this freedom, and then for me pursuing that idea of freedom in the natural world, something else happens, right? And I start being responsible for myself in the freedom. because if something happens to me and I'm by myself or just with my guys, that's who we're responsible to. And then from there, I start being observant, right? And being observant in the natural world unlocks so many things that sometimes we miss in just living our everyday pedestrian life. Would you agree with me on that?
Oh yeah, and look back at it, there was something mesmerizing about the idea of the hobo life. Just to take off and catch a freight train or walk or do whatever, but then realism comes in. We talk about responsibility of others, responsibility of self, and you know how am I going to eat? I can't just depend upon somebody to give me a handout. So those things I think develop as you get a little older.
Yeah, yeah,
But the idea of hobo I liked that when I was a kid.
yeah. Sure, sure. Um, and so something else that's kind of I think been building through our conversation, and you're really touching on it a lot when you talk about, last time you talked about you really didn't think anything of what you were doing other than that you had to work and sustain, and it was just you accepted as you were being raised that it was a part of life and how society kind of worked. And then you talk about, Mark Twain, and we talk about some of these other ideas and kind of the hobo in American history. And we're starting to deal with this concept of the American dream a little bit.
That what now?
The American dream.
Right, right.
What does that mean to you? What does that mean to you now?
I think I really kind of goes back to the childhood. I think the freedom is to me the American dream. It's never meant to me about owning a home or having property or doing that. That's never been the American dream for me. For me, the American dream has always been the freedom to move, the freedom to go, freedom to study, the freedom just freedom.
The freedom to be able to leave home and go somewhere else and have the confidence that you'd be able to have the freedom to live and work and participate in society. Is that?
Yeah, yeah. That's my American dream. I know you hear now about the people have the American dream of owning a home, which is great. We have, and you want to do that, but that's not my American dream.
Do you think that you were kind of conscious of that at a young age? Did you have any consciousness of what you were pursuing as an American dream?
As far as contemplating it and planning on it, probably not. I think I just took it maybe for granted that I was able to go when I wanted to go, and because as a child you have the parents that are put guidelines, but as you get older, those guidelines become boundaries become wider and wider, and yeah, we've got a pretty good life here in the United States, and like a lot of us don't appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think maybe a lot of people might have that same one word answer as far as freedom being the American dream, but I think you have a very interesting perspective on you talking about being able to travel and leave. A lot of people do think of the American dream kind of as owning a home and having a family and kind of creating a I don't know a savings or something, and that being. And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that. And you should certainly create a savings, right, and all those things. But That's not really what you were expressing in that, in
No,
your American dream, right?
I really think the Chris Christopherson Bobby McGee song. It's a good if you look at the words, freedom is just another word for nothing else to lose. If you got nothing else to lose, you can go and do what. If I didn't have to worry about making a mortgage payment or a car payment or feeding a child or what, I got nothing. I just go.
Kind of no attachments,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right.
But I don't
That's
think God made us that way. I think God made us to be in community because
yeah,
we enjoy being around other people.
yeah.
But it's a paradox, really.
Or it can be a paradox, or maybe it's more of a balance. It's an ebb and flow, right?
Yeah.
And the things can exist together, but maybe not in this way that is standardized, um, of this maybe a cookie cutter American dream. Um, that's interesting. So, do you think that your folks had a similar idea of what the American dream was?
Uh, I think they were more the idea of the American dream would have been to have a house and a place called your own. I think that was the big deal for dad and mom. But I also look, because dad worked all the time. But when I got a little older, probably in high school, he would able to take a week or so off from time to time, and it was a joy for them to go to the mountains, the Smoky Mountains and the Cherokee, and that was our place to go as a vacation. And I think the freedom to do that was important. I mean, no, there wasn't any police or government saying you can't go there.
And so we're getting into some heavy issues a little bit about freedom. And, maybe before freedom comes security in some philosophical or discussions or debate, right? And so that's an interesting aspect. And you think maybe, coming out of the Depression, the Depression era,
Oh, sure.
right? Finding that security is certainly prioritized, right?
I think the Apostle Paul puts it like this: we're a slave to something.
Hmm.
We're going to be a slave to that piece of property or that stuff, that car, or we're going to be a slave to the freedom that Christ gives us not to worry about that. But we're a
Or
slave one way or the other.
or even just the freedom, just a slave to the lifestyle of being free, even if they're outside of a
Exactly.
Christ complex.
Exactly.
That's very interesting, and so that kind of ties in to that transcendentalist discussion that we referenced just a little bit earlier, and we're really getting beyond the time that I want us to do in one session on this. So I know once again we're taking our time kind of going through your life chronologically, but I want to unpack that more and when you kind of became aware of these deeper thoughts around some of what we're discussing as the American dream, from enlightenment idea of liberty or freedom, and then some of these transcendentalist ideas of what that really means, and maybe even what we mean by enlightenment and transcendentalism. Um, just a whole lot in there, I feel like. And so I think it's good that we take our time with it, if that's all right.
Yeah, I chase a lot of rabbits.
Hey, pops, we're gonna cut us off right here, and we're gonna save a rabbit for another day. I just want to tell you once again how much I love you and appreciate you for doing this.
I love you too, buddy.
All right, folks. Once again, this is Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. Peace and love.